You're watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Here's your host, Don Ansell.
Brigadier General Dan Hickman. Where were you brought up, raised?
I was born here in Wilmington.
Okay, I was going to say a Wilmington native, so I will. Dan Hickman, who was in active duty in both Vietnam and Iraq, rose to the rank of Brigadier General. Eventually was at Cape Fear Community College as our guest. We're talking about PTSD right now, post-traumatic stress disorder. That was not, when you got back from Vietnam, that label, that had not been established.
No, we never heard of that.
Never heard that.
I mentioned earlier the World War II was fought by what I call the John Wayne generation. They just came home and sucked it up. The Vietnam era veterans were raised by the John Wayne generation, and I think we had the same idea, come home and just suck it up and go on. And in most cases that works. I mean, if you have some sort of transition, you go back to being who you were after some weeks or months or whatever, depending on the experience.
Because before we went on the air, I said that my dad was in World War II, and I'm doing this show today, and I realized I had never talked to him. He had never spoken about it.
I think part of it was everybody in the World War II, I mean, everybody you knew was in the war, and everybody just took it for granted that everybody was in the war. And in Vietnam, it was a much smaller percentage of the population, and now it's a relatively small percentage of the population that is fighting the current war.
Because it's an all-volunteer army or military, whereas it used to be a combination of volunteer and draft.
And it's a protracted war. It's going on for some years, and will go on for some years.
You think it will?
I do.
Well, tell us about some of the challenges of transitioning from a combat environment to a community environment without that middle step of going back into a military environment so that you can exercise some of those demons that we just talked about.
Oh, when I was in Vietnam, it's a little different experience, but when I was in Vietnam, we didn't get any briefings, but I had the advantage of coming back to an active unit and being surrounded by veterans. When I went to Iraq, I was in a reserve unit, and the Army does a good job now of briefing veterans, or of briefing soldiers. They tell you when you go home, these are the feelings you're going to have, and so forth, and these are the things, and they do it for families too. And it's a very good job, and they do a lot of that.
But that wasn't the case in Vietnam.
No, not at all. Not at all in Vietnam.
Pre-Vietnam.
But I have to say that your life is what your life is when you're in the combat zone. Your family is the people around you, and even here in those briefings, and even having had the experience that I had before, it was still. At some point when I got back home, I said, "Gosh, I heard this in the briefing," or my this lieutenant who worked with me came in the first day we came home, had a 3-day pass, we came back. He walked in that morning and said, "I just had the worst fight I've ever had in my life with my wife," and I thought to myself, that's exactly what the chaplain said. If you don't keep your mouth shut when you get home, your wife's been running the house. Just be cool and kind of blend back into the situation. We were, and they are now briefed on how to handle that transition back, and it's very good. But as good as it is, it's like, I don't know, being inebriated or something. There are certain things that you're just slower on the uptake about because your reality is a reality that you've just been living for the past year or however how long you've been gone.
It's a totally different reality that you're dropped into. I'm curious, this aside from what we were just talking, did you have any political opinions about the war, about Vietnam? Did you, at the time?
In Vietnam? I think, doesn't matter what your politics is. I think a soldier wants to win the war. You have a mission, and your objective is to kill, capture the enemy. And anybody that stands in the way of that, short of the commander-in-chief, you'd have a difference of opinion with. So when I was in Vietnam, I didn't have a very high opinion of the war protesters. And nor did I in 2000.
And to win a war, you have to have soldiers that are there to win.
Right. Right, and I was in Iraq during the presidential campaign and election, and I will tell you that the highest number of attacks we had during that campaign or during that fall was a month before the election. The enemy was voting because they know they influence American opinion. You know, what happens on TV. It's a number of car bombs. Car bombs don't do anything tactically. They influence the opinion of the Americans who see them on TV.
Were there folks in the military while you were there who were fighting the war but were not sold on it?
I don't know. When you're in combat,
you're fighting for your life.
I'm fighting for the guy next to me, and the guy next to me is fighting for me. I mean it goes beyond politics. Or
how different do you think the all-volunteer military of today is as compared to the military system that included a draft? Do you think it's a lot different?
It's a very professional. You know, the quality of the soldiers, I would say today, is on average probably better than Vietnam. The culture in the military is different. In Vietnam, it was, the Vietnam War was more risk-taking. We had more autonomy as
Do you think
junior.
it changes the support for war in the general population when there's not a lot of shared, you said a small portion of our population, but when you have families who's...
for whatever reason, the support in the community for the soldiers, I think, is much higher now than it was during Vietnam. In Vietnam, you had a higher number of the population serving, but the support is much higher now.
For the military.
Right, for the military, right.
Not necessarily for the engagement.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, you hear people say, I'm against the war, but I'm for the soldiers.
Right.
Well, if you're a soldier and your life is on the line, that is a hollow statement, because you can't be anything except for killing the enemy or capturing the enemy.
I'm curious, too, on your take on the abolition of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
You might better restate that if you would.
I'm curious how you feel about the abolition or voting down Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Well,
and integrating the population of the military officially.
I think the military's job is to win or deter wars, and I think you want to build teams that are the most capable, best teams you can build. If you put, in my opinion, we have to be careful that we don't put social engineering ahead of mission accomplishment. And that's my opinion, not the opinion of the military. I'm retired, so I don't speak for them. But I would tread carefully in changing a military that's working very well right now.
We're going to come back and talked about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and how it's being handled today when we come back. Stay with us.